Glossy corporate headquarters in the Swiss Alps and glass-walled boardrooms hide a dark secret that should be on the front page of every newspaper in America. The year is 2026, and right now, in pediatric wards across Europe, nurses are trying to explain to terrified parents why their infants are vomiting uncontrollably. Hospitals in Lyon, in Manchester, in Hamburg are logging case after case of unexplained gastric distress in newborns. The answer connects the Nestlé baby formula recall in 2026 with a toxin so small, so invisible, that standard pasteurization cannot kill it. The answer links an infant food safety scandal to a chemical supplier operating industrial fermentation lines in Wuhan, China. The answer exposes a 40-day window where two of the most powerful food corporations on Earth knew something was wrong and said nothing to regulators, nothing to pediatricians, and nothing to the parents mixing formula powder into bottles at 3 in the morning. This is not a story about accidents. This is a story about choices, corporate choices, and the infants who paid for them. Empty grocery store shelves in Paris and London stand as a silent warning to parents who trusted the blue and white packaging of SMA infant formula and the gold foil tins of Aptamil. Both brands, both implicated, both now at the center of the Aptamil recall news that European regulators scrambled to contain before the full scope became public. By February 2026, French health authorities had pulled over 300,000 units from Carrefour and Leclerc distribution warehouses. British retailers received emergency alerts from trading standards offices, and Boots pharmacy locations across the United Kingdom quietly emptied their infant nutrition aisles overnight. Supermarket staff were given no public script. Customers who asked questions were told product was temporarily out of stock. The American press barely covered it. The Food and Drug Administration issued no public alert, no press conference, no parent advisory. And the formula cans sitting in your local Target aisle, on Walmart shelves right now, stacked in the baby section of Costco, they are from the same international supplier chain, and they contained the same ARA oil during the same contamination window. That is not speculation. That is a supply chain audit trail. Microscopic views of the cereulide toxin and bubbling chemical vats reveal the invisible killer at the heart of this scandal. Cereulide, the word sounds clinical, distant, almost harmless. It is not. Cereulide is a heat-stable cyclic depsipeptide produced as a metabolic byproduct of Bacillus cereus bacterial colonies. Scientists classify it specifically as an emetic toxin, which is a technical phrase for what most people call a silent vomit toxin. Here is the part the infant formula industry does not want you to understand. It survives boiling. It survives factory pasteurization at standard commercial temperatures. It survives the industrial sterilization protocols that Nestlé and Danone print in their quality assurance brochures and slide into regulatory filings. Once cereulide is inside a powder batch, there is no cooking it out, no processing it away, no post-production safety net. In infants whose immature livers lack the enzymatic capacity to neutralize this compound efficiently, cereulide toxin exposure through SMA is not a stomach bug. It is a systemic metabolic attack that at sufficient concentrations has been linked to acute liver failure in adult case studies. Now apply that to a 6-week-old. European researchers documented cases in the 2026 outbreak showing elevated liver enzyme readings in infants younger than 8 weeks. The contamination source was not a factory floor accident. It was poured deliberately, in measured industrial quantities, into the formula itself. It was the contaminated fuel for infants. Modern factory assembly lines in Wuhan and industrial oil drums mark the origin of the failure that nobody in corporate communications wanted traced back to its source. Arachidonic acid oil, often abbreviated ARA oil, is extracted through fungal fermentation in large industrial bioreactors, then refined, concentrated, and shipped internationally as a specialty lipid additive. On the label of SMA Pro First Infant Milk and Aptamil Pro Futura Combiotic, ARA oil is listed as a premium ingredient, a developmental benefit, a feature parents are supposed to feel good about paying extra for. It is the contaminated fuel for infants, repackaged as a selling point. The problem is that neither Nestlé nor Danone produced this oil themselves. They sourced it from a contracted third-party supplier operating commercial fermentation infrastructure outside Wuhan, China. That facility's industrial extraction lines and fermentation vats are now at the center of active regulatory investigations in Germany, France, Belgium, and the United Kingdom. The ARA oil contamination Wuhan connection was not a surprise to everyone. Internal quality assurance logs later obtained through a source connected to a German investigative outlet show a technician flagged an abnormal microbial load in a received shipment in late November 2025. The flag was logged. The file was escalated through the standard quality chain, and then, according to those documents, the file sat in a review queue for weeks while the product continued to ship. White-coated laboratory scientists and stacks of confidential internal documents show the 40-day delay that transformed a containable quality event into a full-scale, multi-nation infant food safety scandal. 40 days. That is the gap between the earliest internal records indicating Nestlé's quality assurance team had flagged a potential cereulide contamination risk and the date the first public recall notice was issued in France. Danone's internal timeline for the implicated Aptamil batches tells a near-identical story. 38 days of silence. During those weeks, the contaminated formula cans did not sit still in a warehouse awaiting investigation. They moved through distribution hubs in Dusseldorf, through refrigerated logistics networks into the United Kingdom, onto pharmacy shelves, into online subscription deliveries, into the hands of parents who had no idea. The legal exposure for both corporations is now being characterized by consumer protection attorneys in Brussels as potentially the largest infant nutrition liability event in European legal history. Class action filings have been initiated in the United Kingdom under the Consumer Protection Act. Italy's antitrust authority opened a parallel investigation. The European Food Safety Authority, the EFSA, issued a formal censure. Their official published communication used the phrase, "unacceptable delay in risk communication" to competent authorities. Glowing red warning signs and frantic news reports represent the global panic of 2026, a panic that American parents are only beginning to understand, because the regulatory framework designed to protect their children contains a structural gap wide enough to drive a contaminated shipping container through. In the European Union, binding mandatory notification timelines require that any operator who identifies a credible food safety risk must alert competent authorities within a fixed window. No discretion. No internal review committee can extend that clock indefinitely. In the United States, the FDA still operates largely under a voluntary recall architecture for processed food categories. Infant formula received additional regulatory scrutiny after the 2022 Abbott nutrition plant shutdown that left American parents rationing formula across bare-shelved pharmacies. But the enforcement mechanisms for contaminated ingredients sourced from international third-party suppliers remain fundamentally weak. There is no mandatory 72-hour reporting clock for a supplier contamination event. There is no automatic penalty structure for delayed self-reporting when the contamination source is upstream. The same Wuhan ARA oil supplier network implicated in the European outbreak feeds into the American infant formula manufacturing supply chain. When journalists pressed the FDA on whether they had opened a formal inquiry into domestic formula batches drawing from the same supplier, the agency responded that they were monitoring the situation. Monitoring. That word. While European prosecutors were already issuing formal document preservation orders to Nestlé and Danone legal teams. Dramatic digital subscription buttons and investigative logos close our audit today. But this file is not closed. The Nestlé files are not finished. The Optimeal recall news will continue expanding as batch records surface through Freedom of Information requests filed with health authorities across the EU. Germany's Parliamentary Health Committee has formally requested internal corporate communications from both Nestlé and Danone, covering the November 2025 to January 2026 window. The ARA oil contamination in the Wuhan supply chain is under active investigation by Chinese commodity inspection authorities at the formal request of at least 4 European governments. The Cereulide Toxin SMA cases documented across European pediatric hospitals are now being compiled by the EFSA into a unified outbreak analysis that will become public record. What you just watched is where this story stands today. Tomorrow, it may be larger. Here is what the industry does not want you to know. The label on a premium infant formula is not a safety guarantee. It is a marketing document assembled from ingredients sourced through a global supply chain that no single regulatory body fully audits. The gap between European enforcement and American monitoring is not an administrative oversight. It is the business environment in which these corporations operate. And the 40-day silence from 2 of the most trusted names in infant nutrition was not a failure of internal process. It was a decision. Subscribe to Label Truth now. Next time, we are moving from the nursery to your dinner plate. We are exposing the rice arsenic link, the terrifying reason why your healthy brown rice might be loaded with toxic heavy metals from a century-old pesticide legacy. You will never look at a grain of rice the same way again.